Hi guys, I'm Jason White. This is my channel, Weird Reads, and this video is my wrap-up for 2018. 2018 was the year where I joined booktube, and I find myself watching booktube videos a lot, and I'll be sitting in bed with my wife. She'll be reading a book or watching her own YouTube channels or her own shows on her cell phone. And I'll be watching YouTube videos, and I'm wondering, like, why the hell am I not reading these books that I'm watching people talk about? I don't know, I've heard that there's other people who have the same issue. But you know what? I did manage to read a hell of a lot of books this year. For me, anyway. It's sad that my year of reading is what encompassed some people's month. But, there's not much I can do about that. Yeah, within the last 5 years, I started setting my Goodreads goal to 20 to 25 books because of my son. He was born in 2013, and he really disrupted my reading and writing life. He pretty much put it all on hold. I got about 20 books a year. During that 5 years. I call it my 3 to 4 year reading slump, because I was having a lot of trouble reading and getting through books. But this year with booktube, I found that I was reading a hell of a lot more, and I ended up doing, even though I set my Goodreads goal this year for 20 or 25, I can't remember which it was exactly, I ended up moving it up to 30. And then I just left it there because, well, I ended up reading like 50 to 52 books, and that's awesome. I used to read anywhere between 60 and 80 a year. I'm kind of getting back to there, and if I can keep the momentum, maybe I can do that again this year. So this video is I'm going to discuss my top reads of 2018, and some disappointments, and just a couple of reading goals. Not plans like I did in my last video, but goals. I might as well handle those first, actually. So, one thing I want to do is I want to read more diverse fiction, and this goes with genre, not just the writers and their nationality or gender identification. I for the longest time I just stuck to horror, and that's fine. But I want to get back to reading some more contemporary stuff, classics, and of course fantasy and science fiction, along with horror. And fall time is typically my horror reading months, and that's probably not going to change. I find that in the winter I tend to read fantasy, which I haven't in the last 5 years at all, because most fantasy come in like brick-sized books. And also in the winter to early spring I like reading science fiction. And then in the summer, it's usually mystery and thrillers. I don't know why this is, but it's like the season of my reading heart. Alright, so yes, I want to read more diverse, and, also, the authors. I just want a better understanding of, like, for example, there's a couple of books I want to read that are fantasy, but they're based on Asian cultures, and that really takes away from the medieval typical fantasy, you know what I mean? So that's one way I'm going to tackle that. And then, there's also, I want to start reading Tananarive Due. She's a horror writer. I'm already reading, I think it's N.K. Jemisin. Yes, it's N.K. Jemisin. And, I'm loving her books, The Fifth Season, right now. I'm reading that right now, and it's blowing me away. It's awesome. I want to read more of her. And, there's a whole bunch of other diverse type authors that I want to check out. Alright, so, and I think I already said I want to put my Goodreads goal this year to 50. I think that's an achievable goal. The only problem is there's a lot of thick books on my to-be-read for 2019, so there's a chance I won't hit it, but that's okay. There's a lot of really thin novella-length books as well, so I guess we'll see. Alright, so my disappointments. There's not many books that disappointed me, but there were a few. For example, Homeland by R.A. Salvatore. It's not that this book is bad. It's just that, you know, this was my second read through, so I don't know if it technically counts, but the first time I read it, I really enjoyed it, but it was a long time ago, and I never continued the series. This year I read it, and it should have been more, all the elements that were in the book should have entertained me more than they did. And I don't know why it fell flat for me, because it's not flat. A lot of people love this, the Dritz series, and I can see why. It's just, it didn't resonate with me, and I don't know why that is, but that was disappointing right there in itself, because I was hoping, honestly, I was hoping to be swept away into a new series. There's quite a bit of books within the Dritz world, and I would have loved to have jumped in. Maybe I'll try book 2 and see if it actually grabs me from there, but I don't know. Maybe I just wasn't in the mood. Who knows? The second book that was a disappointment for me was Vampires by John Stakely. This book, it's hard for me to explain. I really like the movie, the John Carpenter movie. It's just stupid, badass, vampire ass-kicking vampire film. That's the best way you can describe that film. And the book, you know, it's one of those rare instances where the movie is better than the book. Not everyone likes the movie adaptation. In fact, a lot of people shit on it, but I like it. It's just a lot of fun. You go into that movie thinking it's going to be fun, and instead of something scary, and maybe you'll have fun watching it. But the book, it just did not work for me. I did not like it at all. And those were the only disappointments for me for 2018. I pretty much enjoyed everything I read. I think most of it was because I was reading again, somewhat consistently. And that made me happy. And it's always nice to be happy, especially with something you enjoy doing. Alright, so now we're going to move into my top reads of 2018. I have 10 books. And like I said, this list actually was pretty difficult out of the 50 or 52 that I read to compile, because most of the books that I read, like I said before, I enjoyed. I gave a lot of 4 stars this year. I used to be really, really, really liberal with my 5 stars. If I enjoyed it and had fun, I'd 5-star read. This year, when I started booktube, my one main goal was to not be quite so liberal with the 5 stars. So I generally enjoyed most of what I read, and I just pretty much threw in my favorites, the things that really made me go, oh, you know, things that were close to 5-star reads, if not 5-star reads. And I'm not going to go into my final rating for it, because I didn't look it up before doing this video. I probably should have. I'll save that kind of stuff for next year, perhaps when I'm more organized. Alright, so, and also this list, I don't know if I mentioned it already, but this list is not in any particular order. Not all of these books were released this year, and so yeah. Video Night is the first book that's on my list here. It was just a fun 1980s like horror film. It was just like reading a movie from that time. I'm not saying it was like reading a script, but it's just the overall atmosphere. It didn't take itself too seriously. It was kind of funny at times, and it was quite gory. If you like those types of 80s horror films, then I highly recommend you check out Video Night by Adam Caesar. It's a lot of fun, and this was a great starting point for me to read Adam Caesar, because I'm a big fan of 80s horror films myself, partly because that's what I grew up on, and and so yeah, I totally recommend it. Definitely give that a check out if you like that type of horror. Along the same lines but different is Witching Hour Theater by Jonathan Janz. I read this right after Video Night, and there are similarities in the love for horror movies, especially older ones, at least older by today's standards. Witching Hour Theater actually takes place in the theater, though, where as the movies progress, it's an all-night marathon type movie watching, where they watch 3 movies. And as the movies progress, or as the time progresses, things start getting weirder and weirder until they get just totally and completely out there and frightening and gory and horrible. It's a fantastic book. I think I gave both Video Night and Witching Hour Theater 5 stars. I'm not sure. Alright, I also really enjoyed Matterhorn by Karl Marlantes. Karl Marlantes served in Vietnam, and it took him, since he came home, about 30 years it took him to write this book. It came out in 2008 or 9. Matterhorn follows, basically, the way I like to put it is, and of course I have no experience, so I can't say from experience or anything like that. I've never been to war, never mind the Vietnam War. I was born just as that war was ending, so but the way I looked at this novel, Matterhorn, is that it almost takes you through the entire journey of what it was like to be in the jungles fighting the Viet Cong. And by that I mean you get there's a progression from living in the base camps to going out on patrol to considering fragging, which means killing or murdering your superiors, because all they care about is their own selves and their careers, and they're putting your life at risk. And that was a big theme of this book, was a lot of the leaders leading these men or ordering them to go into the woods, and even some of them with them, were career soldiers. And these are people who want to advance their careers, so they'll make really stupid decisions because their idea of what they can achieve at the end of that will advance them. And, you know, everyone wants to be a general someday, basically. And there's also the threat of your career, if you fuck up, and you fuck up huge, of your career being, you know, killed. So a lot of people died for people's careers, and that led to hill battles. Hill battles are the most ridiculous battles ever fought in the history of war, if you ask me. All they did was they would go up and down the hills, fighting for the hill. They'd take the hill, and once they had control of that hill, they didn't keep it. They walked off and went somewhere else. And the Viet Cong would come back and take the hill again. And so they'd be sent back up the hill to fight for it again. And there's the Vietnam War was based mainly on casualties of the enemy. Casualties were a huge part of how they figured if they were winning or losing the war. And the whole war was just a big mess. And this book, I think, kind of shows that. Even though you're with the grunts, you're not with the leaders, you're with the grunts. But Karl Marlantes really, it's a memorable book. It's going to be, I think, not just top of this year, but top of my life. One of my favorite reads of all time. And that's Matterhorn by Karl Marlantes. I could go on and on about that book. It's awesome. I want to read it again. I don't usually do rereads too often. Alright, another book was that made my top list is this one, Hark the Herald Angels Scream. This is edited by Christopher Golden, and it has stories in it by Joe Lansdale, Scott Smith, Sarah Pinborough, Shannon McGuire, Jonathan Mayberry, Kelly Armstrong, Josh Mailerman. There's quite a few authors in here you'll recognize. There's actually a story in here by Christopher Golden as well. James A. Moore. Joe Lansdale, did I say him? Yes, I did. It's got a lot of heavy hitters in this anthology, and almost every story really resonated with me. I listened to this in preparation for an interview I did with the Great Lakes Horror Company podcast with Christopher Golden. And I'll put the link for that down there. You can go listen to that. And I also wanted to listen to it to put myself in the Christmas spirit. And this book actually really helped with that. Some of my favorites were, let me see here. Well, Christopher Golden's story was a really interesting take on the whole Weinstein crap that happened. And it's still going through the courts right now. Good Deeds by Jeff Strand had me on the floor laughing. That is such a dark, twisted story, but very funny. It really appealed to my dark, twisted side. Oh wait, it's Honor Thy Mother by Angela Slater. That was a really, really good story as well. You know, I enjoyed all the stories in here, but I wanted to mention those because they they were the funniest. If not funny, then they were just the best of this anthology. So next year for Christmas, you need to pick this up and read it. It's a lot of fun. And talking to Christopher Golden was a lot of fun as well. He's a pretty cool guy. One of the most intense reads of 2018 for me was The Cabin at the End of the Woods by Paul Tremblay. This book had me on edge pretty much from the get-go. The story follows a couple, a married couple, and they're gay. They're male gays. That sounds horrible. Male gays. They're a gay couple, and they've adopted an Asian girl because long before this story takes place, they went to, I believe it was Tokyo, and while they were there, they decided to adopt a little girl. Her name is Wen. And anyways, the story takes place at this cabin in the middle of nowhere, and this group of people sort of come in and hijack their holiday because they believe that if they can't convince one of the three of them to kill the other willingly, then the end of the world is going to happen. And I don't really want to give away any spoilers. This book is brilliant, though. You kind of have to go in and pick out the points, though, of what's actually happening in the background. Is the apocalypse happening or not? Is not the focus of the book. The focus of the book is what the characters do and how they react, and that falls into the outcome. There's a lot of people on Amazon who really didn't like the ending of this book, and I was almost one of them. I liked the book regardless of the ending, but I think people were looking at it wrong. And actually, I know people were looking at it wrong. It's a character study. If the end of the world is happening, so to speak, what do you do to prevent it? And if you have to sacrifice someone you love in order to prevent it, would you? And that's the question of the book, and that's the way you've got to read it. Alright, enough of that. It's a great book, though. I did have it at 4 out of 5 stars, but I think I'm going to bump it up to 5 out of 5 stars. It's a brilliant book. It's my first Paul Tremblay, and it's certainly not going to be the last. Alright, another favorite. This was at the beginning of the year for me. It was January or February. I listened to this on audiobook. It's The Secrets of Ventriloquism by John Paget. And I've said it many times before, even though I went out and bought myself the physical copy here. I highly recommend the audio version. It's read by the author, John Paget, and he's an actual ventriloquist. He, you know, the first couple of stories in this anthology are, you know, they're not basic by any means, but compared to the rest of the anthology, the first 3 stories, until we got to Origami Dreams, that's when I was like, whoa, that story really, really played with something that I already have kind of experienced to a certain extent. I mean, not the supernatural way, it's more of a mental. We're not going to get into that, but once we get into Origami Dreams, then you get 20 Simple Steps to Ventriloquism, The Infusorium, Organ Void, The Secret of Ventriloquism, and Escape to Thin Mountain. All those stories are like, they're not of this world. They are not of this world. It's like John Paget tapped into something very dark and very twisted of what it means to be alive as a human being, and he put it in this thin book, in those stories. Like I said, the first stories are good. They're just, I mean, they're deserving of the 5 stars as well, but it becomes something else once we hit Origami Dreams, in my opinion. But the whole book itself is just fantastic. I only put that there because you could read those first few stories or listen to them and say, I don't know what this guy's talking about. You have to listen to the whole thing and in order, I think, in order to get the whole feel of it. It's definitely a book I'm going to reread at some point or re-listen to, and I can't recommend it enough. It's going to be an all-time favorite as well. It's just an awesome experience. Also, at the beginning of 2018, I read a book called Chills by Mary Sangiovanni, and I really enjoyed this book. It basically takes place in the middle of winter with these snow creatures, and it's not really snow creatures, but there's, I'm gonna leave it at that. It was just a lot of fun, and you know what? There's a lot of people who talk about reading horror that takes place in the winter, during winter, or just reading reading wintry fiction during winter, and this is a good one if you're into reading something with snow and really cold temperatures. Chills by Mary Sangiovanni. I think I gave that a 4 or a 4.5 stars. It was about a year ago I was reading it and finished it. I think it was early January. I have to double check that to make sure. Another one that really affected me was, and this is a nonfiction book, is Successful Author Mindset by Joanna Penn. If it wasn't for this book, if I didn't read this book, then I wouldn't be sitting on top of a 75,000 word novel right now. It's not done yet, and it's taken me a lot longer than I had planned, but I still pumped out a novel this year, and that's like, what? The last novel I wrote was in 2013, before my son was born. I was laid off from my job that I had for like 12 years, and while I was on unemployment and looking for another job, I went to the library every day and I wrote like 1,000 to 2,000 words, and that was The Haunted Country, which technically not available right now, but it might be coming out again soon. Well, I'll keep you updated on that, I guess. Anyways, so I definitely, if you're in a reading slump by any means, or not reading slump, a writing slump by any means, and like I said, I was in one since that book was written. Wrote a few short stories here and there during that 5 years, but this book really kicked things back into high gear. And so if you're experiencing, and the reason for my, it's almost like a vicious cycle. I really got unconfident. I lost any confidence I had in my writing and myself as a writer during that 5-year period, because, well, it was kind of like an isolated, if you're not writing, then you start losing trust in yourself as a writer. And the same thing goes with reading. It was a really kind of hard time for me because of that kind of stuff. But that book pulled me back out. It really said, you know what? Fuck your confidence. You're going to fail. Alright? You're going to fail. And you know what? When you write that first draft, it's going to suck. Let it suck. And so I took a lot of the advice from that book, and it's pretty much changed my writing life. And I can't thank Joanna Penn enough for writing that book. Alright, I think there's only one more. I haven't talked about Sharp Objects. I want to pair this up with the TV series, the HBO series, because I liked it a lot. I watched it first, and I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. I liked it better in the book, but the book itself was really good. And so it makes my my top 10 list here. Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. And last, certainly not least, is The Ballad of Black Tom. I read this Books in the Freezer readathon back in October, I think it was, and I read it in one sitting, and I hadn't done that since probably 2002 or 2003, reading an entire, I mean, it's not that great of a feat. It's 150 pages exactly, almost exactly anyway, 149 pages, but for me to sit down and just read a book in an afternoon is kind of rare. But I did it with this one, and then I did it a couple more times. So, yeah. Anyways, this book, it's really, it's kind of a ironic book, in a sense, because it takes a black character, and was thrust into like a Lovecraftian type world, and you know, it's well known that Lovecraft was racist in early 20th century writer who was a racist. You know, I could go into that, but I don't really want to. I don't think this is the place. But he really sort of takes the idea of racism in that time period, may I add. It's like 1925, I think, when the story takes place. And he really gives it a good kick in the ass. For example, you take a character who's been racially condemned, basically, his entire life, and you give him godlike powers. And what happens? What does he do with those powers? And so, yeah, I love this book. It's kind of weird because it does what I sometimes really can't stand. It's halfway through the story, it switches into a completely sort of different area where who you thought was the main character is gone. And that kind of threw me for a loop, but then you sort of get the idea of what's going on and why that main character is gone and what's happening with that main character, and you're just like, oh my god, this book is brilliant. And so that's The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor LaValle. Highly recommended. It's a beautifully executed book, and I loved it to death. Alright, so I think that's it. That is my 2018 wrap-up. Thank you for paying attention. If you're still here, thank you so much. And I guess at the end of this video here, I'll just discuss quickly some goals for 2019 for my channel here, and I'm just hoping to be able to put out more content. I found that in the last couple of months I've stuck primarily to book hauls and end of the month wrap-ups. I kind of want to branch out. I have like a top 10 list of horror books that I want to put out. I want to do some more top 10s, and maybe even want to branch out into interviewing people. I don't know. We're gonna see if I can adapt that into this channel or not. So thank you so much for watching, and keep being creative, and we will catch you again soon in my next bookish video.